Hello and welcome. Our next presenter, Ben Sturmfels, is a software developer and activist from Ballarat in Victoria. He organises Free Software Melbourne and leads the End Software Patents Australia campaign. Today he's going to teach us about his experiences transitioning from PHP to Django on the sly. Please make him feel welcome.
Hello everyone, it's a privilege to be here. I'm really grateful for the conference organisers for running such an awesome conference. And it's a lovely community too. Everyone's very easygoing in the Python world, which is nice. On that note, how do you know if someone's a Ruby developer or not? They tell you in a few minutes. Seconds maybe, yeah. So this talk is, I'd like to encourage you to move, you have the ability to move from PHP to Python. I'd like to tell you a little bit about how you can do that. Like it's not a big deal, it just takes a while, and there are some steps you can do to progressively do it. So a lot of our time is spent dealing with existing software. It's a fact of working in software is that not everything is this greenfield development where you get to, you do your Django tutorial and you're like, right, I've written a blog, now we'll use that for, now I'll make my next big application. The fact of the matter is that often you're working with something that's existed for a long time even. So really, if you want to work in Django, often you're going to have to deal with some existing software in another language. It could be PHP or it could be something else. And there's a few ways you can go about it. So, starting from scratch is the most attractive way. We love having a clean slate to work on, and it's just a really appealing thing. There's something about it. But the problem with this approach is that it's a good way to put yourself out of business and lose your client in the process. Even if you do manage to provide the software in the end, it may not be what was actually wanted, or it may be completely irrelevant in the market by the time you've got it up and working. There's been lots of people writing and talking about this approach over the years, so this isn't a new thing. Starting software from scratch is a bad idea. The big problem here is that it's great, you can start it and you start writing, and you get to the point where now you need to hook it into the existing client systems. You've got a registration system and you need to replace it with your new one. And the best analogy I could come up with was the bridge, where you've done all this work but you don't actually know how to put that piece in the middle. You end up kind of stuck. So the approach I'm encouraging you to use is an incremental approach. The analogy I wanted to use was that it's kind of like replacing the train tracks while the trains are still running, which probably doesn't, lend well to the way train tracks are replaced in, say, Melbourne, for example. They do tend to cause interruption, but this approach is like replacing the rails without stopping the trains. So the idea is that it's progressive rather than a big bang approach. And the idea is that you maintain compatibility all the time, and you spread the changes in little pieces out over time. And what this does is it dramatically reduces your risk. The system's always running, it's always, you're always taking payments or registrations or whatever you do in your business. And at any point, you don't have this big amount of risk sitting there. You haven't run away and started building something and then you don't know whether it's going to work or not. Your system's always working. So this isn't the most easy approach, I'd have to say. Like it works well, but it's a long journey. And a bit about what I wanted to tell you about in this talk was a bit about how to navigate it. So that's my train again. So I aimed this talk at me 3 years ago because I was starting on this path of wanting to move an existing client to Django. So we had an existing client with an established, so it was a Victorian charity. They have well established and rapidly growing, and we had a long and healthy relationship with them, which was great. They trusted us as a technology provider. And they also understood the benefit of investing in good technology to save themselves time in the long run. That's not always common, but it was really good in this case. So what they had was a moderately large PHP application that did things on the public side and also stuff for their internal staff. So systems that, take incoming messages from the public and they can filter them and send them to different people, registrations, mapping things, whole lots of stuff that just save them time in their organisation. The reason I'm contrasting PHP and Django, which, I'm comparing apples and oranges in a way because PHP is a language and Django is a framework that's built on top of Python. But the reason I'm doing that is because this code base was started before, systems like frameworks for PHP like CodeIgniter and Cake and all this stuff that I don't really know that much about. So it was just PHP and I was going to Django. So we'd built some in-house, as everyone does when they start to build a moderately large PHP application, is you start building your own tools and your own, ORM-y type things and all sorts of stuff. So the other thing about that was that these tools were things that were actually useful to the organisation. We wanted to keep them. So it wasn't like we could just throw them away and start from scratch because they had everyday business value. We couldn't take them offline because that was a core part of the organisation's business. So let me just scroll down here. The problem with PHP, which many of you probably already know about, is that you get to a point, sort of about 80% of the way through the problem, and things get hard because you don't have this this lovely structure around things that, say for example, Django brings to things. Things just tend to evolve. So it kind of gets to an unsatisfactory kind of point where adding new features isn't something you enjoy doing, which is a real shame. So we had this existing project, and we had some Python experience, and I wanted to move to Django, basically. We talked about it a lot in the team, and I wanted a pony. So what I was really looking for in this was, our main goal was long-term success for this client. We wanted their systems to be maintainable well into the future. We wanted to avoid painting ourselves into a maintenance corner where every day got harder and harder and we could build less and less things. And to that end, we wanted to be able to add new things faster because new things are really useful, and that helps organisations, especially organisations where money is very tight, like not-for-profit. It really helps them stay ahead. And the other thing I wanted was job satisfaction because, as I mentioned, the more PHP you write, the more you have to maintain, and you just start to not enjoy it very much after a while. So I was feeling a little bit concerned about whether I wanted to be, a web developer. I'd done it for a lot of years, and I was starting to wonder. So the first thing you need to do is win over your team, your boss, and your client. I've got the notes that I've written down. I've got a whole lot of dot points that make up this talk, and there's a URL to it at the last slide. So if you want to copy down my reasons for convincing your boss to move to Django, don't write them down now, because just pull them off the page at the end. It's on the last slide. So, why Python? Python is, I don't have to say this, but Python is a mature, popular and reliable language. This is what you tell your boss and your colleagues. Python's holding steady at number 8 in the TOB popularity index of programming languages. It's got a significant lead over Perl and Ruby at number 8, hang on, so Perl was, I have to try and remember. I think Perl was number 9, just behind Python, and Ruby was number 11, or something like that. It's got about a 2 percentage point lead over Perl and a bit more over Ruby. So it's substantially more popular. It's easy to learn, it's widely taught. Universities teach Python regularly in their curriculum, so there's more people coming into Python. It's as a core language, it's nicer and more user-friendly than Perl, and it's got more mature libraries than Ruby. The one major thing was that it had better development tools than PHP. I can't tell you how much I love the Python debugger. When I get really stuck, I just drop into the debugger and I can see what's going on. And not having those kind of tools in PHP just leaves you feeling helpless. And feeling helpless leads you to not enjoying your job very much. Python's also got this culture of engineering and quality and modularity built into it. So these are all great reasons to go with Python. It's a solid choice. No one's going to criticize you for going with Python. And why Django? Well, Django is also like Python, it's one of the de facto standards in terms of tools. Django is also already running sites bigger than yours and mine. Things like Mozilla, for example, which Ryan spoke about just a moment ago. It can do things. Django is ahead of the curve in terms of what you'll need. We found this in our move to Django. The things we needed as we stepped along the process and the site grew and used more of Django's features, Django was ahead of us by about a year in terms of building these features into the framework. So it's already well ahead of what you probably need for a conversion at the moment. It's built by extremely smart people working around security issues and things like that, because to be honest, who has time to get across all the types of, what type of cryptographic hashing you should use for your passwords? Like, that's never going to be a priority when you're building things for a running business. Django is extremely mature and responsible in its approach to backwards compatibility. So there's this is one of the fears when you're taking a technology to an organization. Is someone going to be able to support this in the future? And Django, yes, someone's going to be able to support it because it's got such a clear pathway to backwards compatibility and deprecation. More so, for example, than PHP and the PHP frameworks and Ruby on Rails, for example, which has on occasions completely broken the framework. It also is, as you can see from the Django Con that we had, it's experiencing a lot of growth at the moment too. So it's an excellent choice. So really, Python and Django, everyone wins. Your team gets proven tools, less boring bits, you don't have to do the form validation. Everyone's happier, you get a more cohesive programming team, which is really what I wanted. And the client gets more features, less bugs, more security. Use the word security when you're trying to convince your client. I know it's cheating a little bit, but it's a loaded word that helps a lot with this sort of stuff. And it's true in this case, so I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to do. You can tell them they get a faster development cycle because they do. You've got better tools, you can punch things out faster. And they get long-term support. But there is a fair bit of path between your PHP code base and getting it into Django. So be aware that it's a long-term investment. Don't try and hide the fact that they're going to have to spend quite a lot of money on this, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time on it to get there. So the motivation behind this on the Sly strategy is that sudden change is really harmful to businesses and organisations. We like lots of new cool things, and everyone does, but when it comes down to actually getting stuff done, people get really, really frustrated if they can't do the things they could do yesterday. So any sudden change that you make to a system, if you unplug one system and plug another system in, and you don't have the same features they had for 3 months, that's a deal breaker. Even even if your client liaison person supports you, the rest of the organisation will probably, form an angry mob and come and hunt you down. So we can't afford to do that. Downtime is lost opportunities for them, for the public too, so we can't do that. And mature customers will see this and be happy to talk about why you want to take a transitional approach to this, keeping it step by step and keeping everything running. So what I'm encouraging you to do with this, this on-the-sly approach is use behind-the-scenes magic to make it all happen. It's not going to be easy for you, but it's the right way to do it. The idea is that the staff working at the organisation and the public shouldn't be aware that you're actually doing anything. You can switch from PHP to Python and Django without anyone really knowing that it's going on. That's the whole idea. So, how do we do this? Secret ponies in your web server. The idea is using a couple of abstractions that are already built into the systems that you're using. So you've got these really, this is stating the obvious, of course, but I want you to understand that this is a useful alternative to some of the other ways to switch from one piece of software to another piece of software. You can do it step by step. So you have these really useful abstractions. You've got your front-end web server, which takes requests, HTTP requests. It doesn't matter what those are and what happens behind the scenes. The public don't get to see that bit. So you can take two different URLs, contact and about us, and you can pass them either to the PHP elephant or the Django pony. And one of those will handle them. No one knows if it's that one today or this other one tomorrow. It'll all just work as long as the software works under the hood. The other useful abstraction is the database. Because databases have this property that they can have multiple processes accessing them at the same time safely, you can have your Django pony accessing the same database as your PHP elephant, and it'll all just work. You've got transactions and locking and all this sort of stuff to prevent any problems happening there. This does kind of assume that your PHP and your Django are in kind of close proximity. We've done it with them on the same servers, but you could also, I guess you could do it, different servers as long as they're on a local network or something like that. So the basic idea is that you start with all these PHPs. These are your views, when you make a request, you get something back, and these are the pieces of code that do that. And all you do is you switch out one at a time. You rewrite them with identical features and full compatibility with the existing code, and PHP is completely unaware that you've switched one. The public is completely unaware. So that's all you do. I want to make a couple of key points about this too, because it's really important when I say you don't change the functionality when you convert it. It's a really, it's easy to get sucked down the wrong path here. So, no new features. No new features when you convert the PHP view to a Django view. PHP doesn't call them views, but no changes to the URLs. And there's a joke in the Django documentation about putting .php on the end would be a silly thing to do, because why would you do that? But this is actually a valid use case for doing that. You can do this in Django URLs. You can put .php, and then all the other PHP systems can still keep referencing that URL. And meanwhile, you can use some of your URL reversing tools in there. It's actually it seems obvious, but it's also kind of counterintuitive doing like this. It's very tempting to jump into this, let's just replace it all thing. So the idea is you need to minimize the time that you have between a piece of working PHP code and a piece of working Django code. Going off and spending a month writing a Django piece is likely to mean you're doing something wrong, and that when you bring it back, it won't plug into the system properly. What I'm advocating here is a very mechanical task. What you're actually doing is converting PHP basically, in some cases, line by line to Python and publishing it as soon as possible. For view type code, which is, I don't know, it depends how much Django you know, but stuff that takes a request, does something, and spits out a response. What I'd advocate is doing it based on looking at what your existing site does and just mirroring it based on functionality, not trying to copy line by line, because Django has too many differences. So just if it validates a form, then you validate a form, or maybe, because PHP doesn't usually validate forms, you could validate and then you've got a new feature. But I'm not encouraging you to put new features in. I shouldn't. For things that aren't sort of view code, like a report that spits out a CSV file, the fastest way to do that is to put the code up, the PHP code in your editor and the Python code in your editor, and just convert them line by line. It sounds kind of silly, but it's actually a very efficient way to write the Python code, and you know, a few hours you have a piece of working Python code, and it might not be perfect, but it works, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. Of course, use Python idioms in the code, but don't rewrite it and don't add new features. I'm a bit reluctant to go down the agile kind of path with this, but I guess if you want to label it that, it's possibly a little bit like that. So, step by step, how do we roll this out? Firstly, you need to get your team consensus on Django and Python. So take out any Rails people that are, you know, trying to push that barrow. Next, you need to get approval from your client to do this. That's a subtle point too, but it's really important. It helps if you've got a pre-negotiated maintenance budget, because you can just use that progressively, and they've got money allocated for that already. So that's great if you can do that. So you take a PHP script and you rewrite it. Either exactly the same, you know, line by line, or for the view you convert it so it does exactly the same thing essentially and prints exactly the same thing on the screen. And then you duplicate, well, that's what we're doing here. We're duplicating the exact functionality in Django. At this point, you know, it might be your first time you've really done Django in a production system, so you have to learn Django. You might even have to start fiddling around with how you deploy it and stuff like that. So how do you put this into production? You deploy it with this exception in your web server. Now, all web server configurations are a little bit different, so I've just put in a bit of pseudocode here. This is your web server config, so everything by default goes to PHP. When someone asks your web server for something, it goes to PHP. But you've now added an exception for the bit you've converted, which is the contact page. If it's the contact page, send it to Django. This is pretty basic, but that's what you do. And then you get to delete some PHP, which is my favorite part of it. So this cycle doesn't actually take very long, you know, a few hours, and you can actually punch out a new piece of Django code. It is kind of tiring though. You get a bit sick of it, so you do need to have a bit of a rest in between, and maybe you can come back to it in a week or a month or something like that and do another piece. So you keep doing this repeatedly, and eventually PHP becomes the exception to the rule. So you can then do this nice little switch where you can put in where Django becomes the default and PHP then becomes the exception, and you have your remaining PHP things. Hopefully there's not very many. You can list them in your config there. It starts to look a bit like this. You surround the elephant. The other thing I like doing, even more than deleting PHP, is drawing graphs about deleting PHP. So this blue line is our PHP code declining over 3 years, which is very exciting. And the really nice thing is we've built lots of new things here, but it's still less than the amount of PHP code we had, which is really cool. And then you win. You just keep doing this progressively, and then you win. So a few tips. Start small, and ideally pick a project that is low priority so you can learn about all this sort of stuff like deployment and getting your development environment set up. even better if it's something low priority that the client wants. There's usually things like that, things that you couldn't possibly have time to build, but they'd really love. Ideally, don't use any Django, don't keep away from the existing authentication. So if it's, ideally pick a public thing that doesn't need any authentication around it, because that's a bit of a sore point. Tip 2, take the authentication away from PHP as soon as possible. There has to be a transitional time when you work with PHP's authentication, but the sooner you can get that into Django and get Django controlling who's logged in or who's not logged in, the better. This is a small point too, but I've found this really important. When you convert a piece of PHP to Django and you release it, you inevitably break things because you forget all these extra features that it has that are kind of hidden, or you made a mistake, because people make mistakes. Calling ahead and actually speaking to the person who this component will directly affect, I've found has had a huge benefit to me, because instead of people feeling frustrated and angry when I break something, they know who to call, and they're quite happy to cheerfully call me up and tell me when I've broken something. They own this problem now, and they can control how it plays out. You also get to find out about all these other things which they've never told you, because they could never be bothered. They're like, oh, well, this was broken as well, I think, and you're like, no, that's been there for years. I'd encourage you to build in some nice shiny things as well. So convert the PHP line by line, but also build in some new, once you've done that, build in a few shiny projects to do as well. So the win. Small sprints like this, converting code chunk by chunks, feels good. It's kind of sustainable. You get these little humps of work, and you can go off and do the normal stuff for that client. As soon as you start to get a few under your belt, you start to feel this kind of sense of calm, because this PHP kind of breeds this mistrust of what's already in the system. So as soon as I had it in Django, I just felt a whole lot calmer. Life goes on as usual for the client. Ideally you haven't interrupted their business very much. The new features are easy now. You don't have to deal with all the existing PHP infrastructure. You can add new things quite quickly. It's quite satisfying when you enjoy adding new features again. And you also get a steady cash flow out of this too, because instead of taking the system off into the back shed and retooling it for 3 years and bringing it back, you're doing it piece by piece, so you can bill piece by piece as well. Off-peak scheduling, by this I mean that you don't have to do it on demand, because this isn't high priority work. The client doesn't value this work at all. They're not going to demand that you do this conversion. So you can put it in your downtime when there's not much other work, so it's great for your business too. Pain points, it takes a long time. It's a bit of a marathon. You need to be confident that you can hang on for a while and just keep doing it, because eventually you'll get there. But it does make some things more complicated. I mean, I've glossed over a few little things like authentication, but there are some headaches along the way. Am I going to be deeply in trouble if I go over time a little? Cool. Another pain point is that this conversion process has a subtle political problem, in that you're charging for work that doesn't actually have any visible change on the surface. So at some point you have to manage this and keep talking to people and all that sort of stuff. There's no real way around this. I found going on and then building the new features on top of the Django base under the name Mark II for the feature, for the component, is actually a good way to do that, because people understand when you're adding new features and they're much more comfortable at paying for that. What I might do is I'll skip a couple of these. What I really want you to avoid is this second system syndrome, which you might have heard written about. It's the kind of, or alternatively, build one to throw away. It's the kind of thing that took down Netscape when they tried to rewrite Netscape Navigator. It takes years to do. You end up with this thing that really struggle to plug back into your existing system. You know, you've got all this data you have to convert. Downtime, it's probably obsolete by the time you've even got it plugged in. So don't do that. This is a good way to destroy your business, lose your client. The other alternative, which I'd encourage you not to do, is listen to people when they say, oh, while you're converting that, would you just mind adding this extra feature? Because suddenly you get pulled out for another week or another month into the project, and you lose this rapid turnaround time. You know, you get lots of feature creep, and you get really tired because, you know, you wish it had been, what started as something easy, just a quick conversion, turns into this horrible thing, and it breeds lots of dissatisfaction. So just convert it straight away, no changes to no features at all. And how is it working out for me, I guess? We're still in business, which is great. We've done our 3 years on this project, and it's now, as you saw from the graph, just about all in Python, which is awesome. So I'd really like to thank my colleagues at Boojum for following me along on this journey. It's been very satisfying to see it work out really well. We still have a good relationship with the client, and I mean, to that end, we've actually been working with this client for longer than most of the staff. We've actually outlived most of the 60-ish staff in the organisation. So it's great that we still have this relationship. They have a reliable code base now. It's all in Django, and just having it in Python, even just making the conversion step from PHP to Python, no new features, has been a huge win because we can track down the problems a lot easier. As you saw, there's substantially less code, which is awesome too. You know, tracking down problems is much easier. And to be honest, I'm enjoying my job more than ever, which is great. So really, what I can say is that you can replace the train tracks while the train is still running, and you'll end up with happier clients, the public, happier developers on your team, and a healthy business model. So you can take a PHP project and convert it to Django, and then you'll have your own pony too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're running a little too much out of time for questions, but I'm sure you'll be around during the rest of the conference. So you just have to ask them yourself. In the meantime, PyCon AU would love to thank you for doing this talk, and I'm sure you'd all love to join me in thank you. We have a lovely coffee cup and some coffee beans from Ritual in Launceston, and I think they're Norwegian blue. Thank you very much.